After a storm, when a tree has fallen across a narrow woodland path, it's not dramatic scene, just a trunk blocking the way. But you were to stop and think. If you were riding through this forest on horseback, you'd have no choice but to slow down. You'd have to dismount. You'd have to step around it. And suddenly it hits you. That is the perfect place for an ambush. Not the kind of ambush you see in movies, where men in clean green cloaks leap out heroically, laughing, and somehow nobody ever gets cold. A real ambush, a desperate one. The kind that doesn't end with a clever joke, but with someone bleeding out in the mud. And that's when we realize something. Most of what people think they know about medieval outlaws is almost completely wrong. Because outlaw didn't mean bandit. It didn't mean rebel. It didn't mean freedom. In the Middle Ages, being an outlaw meant something far more terrifying. It meant the law itself had abandoned you. The word outlaw meant you were no longer human. When we imagine medieval outlaws, we imagine Robin Hood, a merry gang in the greenwood, campfires, freedom, the noble thief stealing from the rich. But in medieval England and much of medieval Europe, outlaw was not a romantic title. It was a legal status, a technical, official condition that stripped you of protection, property, and identity. The Latin term used in records was outlawed, meaning outlawed, and the effect was brutal. You were removed from the king's peace. That phrase matters. The king's peace was not just a poetic idea. It was the foundation of medieval law. To live under the king's peace meant the law recognized you as a person worth protecting. To be outside, it meant you were fair game. In theory, anyone could harm you, even kill you, and face no punishment. You could not own land. You could not inherit. You could not go to court. You could not demand justice. You weren't just a criminal. You were legally erased. And in a society built entirely on rights, land, and legal protection, this was almost the same as a death sentence. So how did someone become an outlaw? Here's the part most people miss. You didn't just wake up one morning and become an outlaw. There was a process. A slow, bureaucratic, deliberate machine. Usually, an ordinary person became outlawed, not because they committed a crime directly, but because they failed to appear in court. The courts had a tool for this, a legal writ that demanded you show up. If you didn't, the authorities would keep calling you, and calling you, and calling you again. Your name had to be publicly announced multiple times, often 5 separate occasions, giving you repeated chances to appear. Only after that, if you still didn't come, you could be officially declared outlaw. So imagine what that meant in real life. It meant people talked, villages whispered, your neighbors heard your name, read out in court. They knew something was coming. And if you were guilty, or even if you suspected you wouldn't get a fair trial, you might disappear before the final call. Because once the 5th proclamation was made, the world changed. Your life became illegal. Magna Carta mentions outlaws for a reason. There's an important clue that tells us outlawry wasn't always fair. In 1215, the Magna Carta, the famous document forced upon King John, specifically addressed outlawry. It stated that no free man could be outlawed or stripped of property without lawful judgment. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Why would that clause exist unless outlawry was being abused? If sheriffs could manipulate court processes, if enemies could push accusations, if political power could erase someone, then outlawry wasn't just a punishment. It was a weapon. A clean legal method to destroy someone without executing them. Because once you were outlawed, you didn't need a trial anymore. Society did the rest. Outlaws weren't just poor men. Sometimes they were nobles. Most outlaws were ordinary people: farmers, laborers, small-time criminals, desperate men with nowhere to go. But occasionally, outlawry struck much higher. Even nobles could be declared outlaw if they rebelled against the crown. Their lands could be seized, their titles removed, their wealth redistributed. Some famous figures lost everything this way, and their followers often suffered alongside them. And here's the key difference between noble outlaws and common ones. If you were wealthy enough, you might survive long enough for politics to shift. You might be restored. You might return to society with your status intact. But if you were poor, you weren't surviving long enough for forgiveness. Where did outlaws actually go? Now comes the famous part, the forest. Yes, outlaws did flee into forests, but not in the way movies show. The medieval forest wasn't simply woodland. A forest was often a legal territory governed by forest law, introduced and enforced aggressively after the Norman conquest. Forest law existed to protect two things: the virt, vegetation, the venison, game animals. Not because medieval kings were environmentalists, but because hunting was a privilege of power. Forests were private kingdoms inside the kingdom, and the punishments for poaching could be savage. So, ironically, forests became perfect hiding places, not because they were safe, but because they were controlled. They had fewer settlements, fewer travelers, more fear, and that meant fewer witnesses. But forests weren't endless green wilderness. They were patchworks: woodland, pasture, villages, clearings, wetlands, and agricultural land, all under forest law. Sherwood Forest, for example, was large, but not infinite. The greenwood wasn't a magical, untouched world. It was a regulated zone where the wrong animal killed could cost you your life. And yet, outlaws still went there. Because being hunted by the king's men was worse. The outlaw's real strategy: stay close to people, but not too close. The romantic general image is of men living deep in the trees. But a real outlaw couldn't survive without access to society. They needed food, tools, information, stolen goods to trade, people willing to hide them. So most outlaws lived on the fringes of civilization, near roads, near villages, near trade routes. Close enough to strike, but far enough to disappear.